Hi, I'm Solveig. I am here with the Cover Crop Breeding Network, which is a multi-institution network of cover crop breeders and trial sites all across the country. And our goal is to improve cover crops so that they meet growers' needs better, and ultimately so there's more adoption of cover crops. I work in Virginia Moore's lab at Cornell. We breed cover crops, forages, and alternative cash crops. And today I'm going to share with you why we're doing this work, how we're doing it, and some successes we've had, along with, to keep us humble, some places where success has been elusive and how we might address those things. So the Cover Crop Breeding Network started in 2016 with a few core trialing sites or core breeding sites, and it's expanded to quite a few sites. This year we have 9 breeding sites, 4 farmer breeders, and about 15 trial sites across the country. We started by working on 3 overwintering legume crops, so winter pea, hairy vetch, and crimson clover. 2 years ago, we started working on cereal rye, which is obviously the most widely sown cover crop. And then just this year, we started looking at brassicas, specifically winter canola. So cover crops offer many benefits, as you all know. This was from the 2022-23 National Cover Cropping Survey. And in the survey of about 550 farmers, we see that most people are citing soil health benefits as their biggest reasons for using cover crops. So building soil carbon, improving water infiltration, decreasing erosion, with also some benefits around pollinator habitat, weed control, things like that. Just so I have a feel, how many of you use cover crops right now? Figured it would be almost everybody. How many of you use winter or fall sown cover crops to overwinter? Almost everybody of that. And then also summer cover crops, or is that cash crop season? There's a few people with summer cover crops. Okay, so we also focus on winter cover crops, so hopefully this will be relevant. But as many of you, I assume, also know, cover cropping takes a learning curve to make it fit each individual situation. So on that same survey, these were the concerns cited by about 150 people who didn't use cover crops. So, and these are legitimate concerns, especially if a person is early in their cover cropping journey. So some farms do experience economic benefits, so reduced fertilizer costs or herbicide costs, but not every year on every farm. Sowing cover crops takes time and labor, sometimes in really pinched windows of the season, things like that. But there are a few things that cover crop breeding can help with, so we can help with the cost benefit analysis of sowing cover crops. We can help achieve to achieve a good stand by breeding for increased winter survival and spring vigor. And we can help decrease weediness. I'll have a story about weediness in hairy vetch coming up. Most cover crop seed is variety not stated. So in contrast to this tag, which is for ND Gardner winter rye, there would not be a variety stated, it would just be a species. The great thing about variety not stated seed is that it's abundant and it's widely available and it's not very expensive. The less good thing is that you don't necessarily know what you're getting in terms of regional adaptation. And if you really like how something does, you can't necessarily go back and get the same thing a second year in a row. So using variety not stated cover crop seed is much better than nothing. It achieves all those important benefits of cover cropping that we've been talking about all day, having living roots in the soil, all that stuff. But our challenge as cover crop breeders is, can we make cover crop varieties enough better so it's worth people's money to buy a cover crop variety that's specifically bred to perform well in a cropping system. So that's all why we breed cover crops. Cover crops have a lot of benefits, and there are ways they can be improved to increase adoption by people who aren't using them yet. But how do we do it? And the answer is the same way you breed any crop. So these 7 steps I'm going to lay out are central to any plant breeding project you want to do on any crop, whether you're using really basic traditional techniques or very high-tech systems. First thing you do is identify your breeding goals. So what traits do we care about? What traits make a cover crop good for the particular system? Is it winter survival? Is it high biomass in the spring? Is it early flowering, so it'll terminate better when you roll crimp it, etc.? So what are we going for? Then what parents would you choose? What variation is there in this crop already that we know of for the traits we care about? Can we find parents that are really good for some of those traits, but less good for others? And if so, we can construct a population that is variable. So these next three steps can making a variable population, selecting from it, and then testing the progeny, and doing that several times in a whole lot of different ways, depending on the technology you have available and what makes sense. And then, if you're successful, if you have had the variability in the population and that trait is heritable, if it can be passed from parent to progeny, you get to release a new cultivar and distribute seed with the help of a seed company. So the last two steps are connecting the dots between the breeding program and the farmers who are going to plant the thing on farms. So starting with our goals. To determine goals for our cover crop breeding efforts, back in 2016, our group gave a survey to farmers across the country. There were over 400 respondents, and the goals might not surprise you. Winter survival is absolutely essential to improving spring stands. Improve vigor, or how fast the thing grows after it comes out in the spring. How much biomass it accumulates are the key traits for having a big bulky stand, either to till into the soil or roll down or spray down. And finally, we didn't ask about seed yield on the survey, but we know that to make a cover crop seed system work, we need to have high seed yielding plants to keep the cover crop seed cost down. So for all our crops, we're breeding for biomass, vigor, winter survival. Then we have some crop specific traits. And specific today, I'll talk about soft seededness in vetch and allelopathy in rye. We're working on various things for the different crops as well. All of these breeding stories are going to start with breeding nurseries. So this is where we plant and note and then select single plants. So we start on a very, zooming down from a whole field level for thousands and thousands of acres. We start with single plants and these nurseries. And the next stop for the crops we've been working on the longest are the legumes. So then we move to advanced line trials. So these are 15-foot rows of the legume flanked by triticale to simulate that competition that the legume would experience in a mix. We had some planting errors in our in these trials this past fall, and went out there to look at them. And I was really impressed by the difference you can see in the legume growth with the triticale. So it's really it's great to have that competition there, and it helps us understand with much more realism how they look in the field. So on all these things, we measure emergence and vigor in the fall, emergence and vigor in the spring. From that, we can calculate winter survival, and then biomass at a time that a farmer in the area would actually be terminating. So our first story will be hairy vetch. Hairy vetch is a great cover crop choice for winter survival. It's very winter hardy, very good at nitrogen fixation, but it has a reputation as, I think, who grows hairy vetch alone or in a mix right now? Few people. Who has grown it and has decided not to? Okay, people are not too against hairy vetch. Well, the reason people have a problem with it, some folks, is that it has a fraction of hard seed. So seed that doesn't imbibe water the first year and and therefore sits in the soil till the second or third year and then germinates, and it can be a weed, depending on what your cultivation system is, that can be a problem. So working on the hard seed in this issue was a priority for us. Vetch can also get massive and viney, which is wonderful if you have the equipment to terminate it and the right window to terminate it, but if either of those things aren't true, it can be a big, massive viney problem. So the group started vetch breeding back in 2016 by collecting germplasm. This is the finding the parents part. So this very broad collection from Russia, Iran, China, the upper Midwest, several farmer curated lines, some seed company BNS selections. So a really big assortment of germplasm, hoping that in there'd be variability for those traits we care about, for the overwintering, the high biomass, and early flowering. Importantly, vetch is an outcrossing species. So what we do in constructing nurseries, there we go. Okay, so this is the space planted nursery in Wisconsin. They use landscape fabric to deal with weeds between the plants. Different nurseries, we use a lawn of pine fescue in ours, but you can see, I think this must be after selection, but a plant would be planted in each one of those holes. Each genotype would be out there 3 or 4 times. There'd be 6 plants per genotype. And so we start with this big, diverse population and then observe each plant individually. It's a lot of note taking, do the stats with information from these individual plants, but also what we know about these plants' parents. So you can start to trace the progenies down the years and figure out which families are generally more favorable. And next we select. So this is one of the vetch nurseries as the plants are in flowering stage, being pollinated by insects. So the technique is really simple. You know, we take notes, we do some statistics, we pick the best families, then within the best families, we pick the best plants, eliminate the rest, which is just a person with a hoe, and then let the bees do their work. And then everything that comes out of that nursery will be a new line. So we'll take a balanced bulk of that nursery. So the same amount of seed from each plant, mix it together. That's the line that will then be trialed in our, advanced line tests. So these are what I talked about before, the 15-foot rows, plagued by triticale, and the things that do well in those tests over a few years go to advanced line trial 2, where they're mixed with triticale and sown in a 5-foot band, which is more akin to how they would be used in the field. So with vetch, we've actually reached the final steps in the process, which is exciting after 7-8 years of work. We have 2 variety releases in the pipeline. So this one will be through Mountain View Seeds. This will be called CCB nitrous. The numbers you see here are from about 50 site years. So since a site varies so much between years in terms of weather conditions, etc., each individual site year combination we count as one environment. So, and all these numbers are in percentages of our best check, which is AU merit, which is a line out of Auburn in Alabama. So it was best for the most consistently good for the most traits that we care about. So in our CCB nitrous, at least 100% of best check for biomass, winter survival, and early maturity, but better for seed yield and for broad adaptation. So the 300 means that CCB nitrous scored in the top 3 for biomass at 3 times more sites than the best check. So that's the benefit of this broad testing network, is that we can detect varieties that are really good and we can assume pretty variable weather conditions, so pretty consistent performers. This is another line, this one up here. Oh, and I should say, nitrous was selected in 2017 in one of our North Carolina nurseries. This one that was selected in New York in 2018 is going to be picked up by Albert Lee Seeds out of Minnesota. So their target area is the Northeast and Midwest. So we redid our statistics for them. to find something with really exceptional biomass and winter survival. So 94% winter survival, which is pretty awesome. And also really good seed yield. And we can give credit to Ryan Hayes out at the ARS in Oregon for doing seed yield testing. They're in the prime seed production environment in the US. So we can get really good data from him in terms of how this would do in a commercial seed production setting. So those are some success stories. And everything that I've talked about so far is just traditional breeding techniques. It's creating a variable population, letting the pollinators do their work, testing the progeny and doing that again and again. This hard seed initiative uses a genomic approach to help get at what's driving the fraction of hard seed in vetch. So what they did was genotyped about 1,000 vetch genotypes and also measured the hard seed percentage on all those genotypes. And then they found places in the genome. So each of these places from chromosomes 1 through 7 that represents a different locus on the vetch genome. And for each of those spots, we ask the question, is there a difference in the genetic, in this genetic marker between hard-seeded plants and soft-seeded plants? We found one big place on chromosome 1 where the answer was yes. So either 1 or 2 doses or one or 2 copies of the genome had that gene for soft seed. We see decreases in the soft seed percentage. Their analysis also showed that about 68% of the variation in hard seededness was genetically controlled versus environmentally controlled. So that's great news for breeders because that means we can make progress, right? If the trait is mostly environmentally controlled, then the work is in the growing system. It's how do we handle our cropping system better to maximize the potential of the plant. But if there's a big genetic component, we can do work by selection to select for plants that have the genes that will make this trait possible. So our collaborators in Wisconsin who have done all this work have put together a PCR marker screen. And so now they can throw out thousands of vetch plants, just the seedling stage in the greenhouse, take a leaf punch, do the marker assay and pick out the few, less than 10% that have the good gene or the favorable allele for this hard seededness trait. And so this fall we should be able to have soft seeded nurseries where the parenting sessions have been selected for having this soft seeded trait and hopefully make a lot faster progress towards a soft seeded vetch that will make people happier when they sow vetch. Although you guys don't seem to be unhappy about vetch, so. Okay, so vetch we made some substantial progress on, it feels good. Crimson clover is a bit of a different story for our breeding project. It's another outcrossing legume, so the nursery and trial structure looks much like vetch. But the germplasm that the group started with, 7 years ago or so, had a much smaller genetic base. So it was collections that our collaborator had made in Texas and Kentucky and Tennessee. And sure enough, they're doing fantastic in the South, but they're really just not shining in the North. I think in general, crimson clover is a more compact plant up here. Like we have decent amounts of it survive, but the plants are just much smaller. So up here, vetch or peas are a more certainly a higher biomass choice. But I guess as you can see, the best entries in our trials, unfortunately, are still the checks. That's not what we want. We have some things that are almost as good, but that's not the goal. So we're revisiting our breeding program, saying, can we get some germplasm that might have some more winter hardiness? That can we find anything out there with higher biomass to introgress in, or do we need to just shift our attention to the crops that we're really making progress on? So this is the keeping us humble part of the presentation. Not everything works, especially the first time. Okay, and turning to a selfing cover crop or selfing legume, winter pea. Peas are not quite as hardy as vetch in terms of an overwintering legume, but they're not bad. They do make a nitrogen contribution, and they're reliably soft seeded, so you don't have any of that hard seed, volunteer issue that you do with vetch. Since peas are self-pollinated, all the reproductive parts are nicely enclosed in the flower, we have to rely on breeders to make crosses that might be favorable to us. So this is the USDA winter pulse breeder, Rebecca McGee out in Pullman, Washington. And for the first, really up until now, she's supplied all the crosses to the program. Like we tell her what traits we're interested in, she supplies us, with 40 or so new entries a year for our nurseries, and we see what we can find. She is moving toward retirement, so we are diversifying our pea crossing program with an emphasis on winter hardiness, because we know there is a small fraction of pea germplasm out there that can be hardy down to less than 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty good. And if we can identify some of those accessions and then make crosses with lines that have other traits that we really care about, like high biomass, then maybe we can make progress on this trait. So we're collaborating with Steve Mulkey, a researcher from University of Minnesota, who's doing cold chamber tests. He's making crosses and then testing progeny in a cold chamber. Our grad student is going to be creating a big pea germplasm collection in a cold growth chamber, and also experimenting with freeze-thaw cycles to see if we can find anything that will endure those conditions, and then integrate that germplasm with more elite lines. She's also doing a GWAS, which is the technique. Genome-wide association study, which is what the vetch folks did to find that marker for hard seed. And she's doing that for cold tolerance traits. So she finds a big enough locus, we could potentially do some screening of things before having to grow them out and see if they survive any given winter. So, and we do selection. The nursery structure is similar. We do plots and research sites. We also have 4 on-farm breeding nurseries in cold locations. If the peas survive the winter well, we select on the same kind of suite of traits that we care about, right? So winter survival, vigor, early flowering. But if we have a winter like this, sometimes the winter does all the selection we need, and we just take everything that survives. And some of those selections have actually been the best for winter survival. Our testing network has shown us that there's this region right here in the middle of the country where winter pea survival is low but not zero. And so that's where we're citing our farmer research sites. Because if folks just have cold conditions and are good collaborators, that's perfect to be able to put a diverse collection of pea germplasm out, see what survives, and then have them use their farmer's eye to tell us which things they think might be most favorable to advance. So our testing has yielded some interesting results. This is an analysis again for the Midwest and Northeast done for Albert Lee. And we find that most, good winter pea varieties. So Survivor and Wyo Winter were the 2 best named varieties in all of our trials. And then this is a good DNS from Lakeview Organic. We see this trade-off, right? So good winter survival, good spring vigor, good biomass, but really low fall vigor. And it's not a huge problem, right? Because the main goal is to get the thing to survive and then produce biomass in the spring. So these are still really good varieties, but we have a couple where we're not seeing that trade-off. We're seeing nice fall vigor and also winter hardiness. We're also seeing pretty wide adaptation. So these 2, this top one was selected on a farm in North Dakota. The second one down was from a farm in Wisconsin. They're scoring in the top 5 biomass there were 16 sites in this analysis. So the majority, the top 75% of sites, which is cool. And, only Wyo Winter is measuring up to that. So that's exciting. We're seeing that we've got some new trait combinations, which is always a big goal of a breeder. Like, can we get traits that are good in certain varieties, but not found in the same varieties? Can we put them together? So it's exciting to see that happen. This is a good time to take a beat to talk about release. What happens with intellectual property? What's the process of getting these things from the breeding program to the marketplace? For the vast majority of our winter pea releases or winter pea lines so far, they've started with USDA ARS germplasm. So that means they are going to go through the USDA release process. Within that, we've got a couple options. We've got the PVP or plant variety protection route, where the PVP holder, which could be ourselves, a seed company, a farmer, or any combination of those people, have exclusive rights for 20 years to over the production and marketing of that variety. With an exception for breeding, breeders can still breed with the material, which is important to us because we really want to see independent breeding continue. And an exception for farmers saving seed for their own farm. Like, you can't save it and sell it, but you can save it for your own operation, which is a great option for people with that capacity. For the farms that we've worked with, some of them have their own small seed companies or farm product operations, and they always have the first right of refusal on something that they selected. And if they choose to share it with the seed company, they would get a share of the royalties. And then finally, this winter, or I guess this coming fall, we are testing a few of our winter pea lines that will be released. Oh, I forgot in the last slide. That's the PVP route. There's also the public germplasm route through. So things would be offered through the National Plant Germplasm Service, and so anybody could request a small quantity of seed to start breeding with, or just to increase and use as a variety per se. So we're interested in both of those routes, especially for peas, because we just want to increase the diversity and quantity of well-adapted winter peas for cover crop use. To test some of those lines on more locations than we have, we're doing some on-farm winter peas trials starting this fall. So participating farms would get 3 or 4 varieties. The plots would be small. They'd be like those 15-foot advanced line trial plots that I was showing earlier. Folks would get 2 or 3 experimental varieties or newly released cover crop breeding network varieties and 1 commercial check. And then that'll allow us to see, how is winter survival doing out in the wild per se, and also just get feedback from growers on which ones are doing what they need in different parts of the country. So if you're interested, I have cards over on the info table. Drop me an email. The CCBN email comes to me. I'll keep you in the loop when that opens up, and I'll also circulate information through all the soil health networks. Has anybody used Seed-Linked, the on-farm trialing software? It's basically, it's a pretty easy to use app. You just get, for the traits we care about, you give something a star rating. You can leave a comment if you want. You can take a picture if you want. But it's a great way for us to accumulate a lot of data, with a pretty low ask from the farmer in terms of note taking, and then we get interactive results right away, and farmers can see that, see how their varieties are stacking up against others. Okay, switching gears from legumes to cereal rye. As you know, cereal rye is the most widely grown cover crop. Its capacity to be sown late in cold conditions and still come up well over winter and provide great biomass in the spring makes it a go-to choice, especially as planting windows get cramped in the fall. We're working on a couple things in rye. One is allelopathy. So these are our partners down at NC State who are looking at this. As I'm sure many of you know, rye has allelopathic chemicals in the roots, really throughout the plant material. Not all varieties are produce the same amount of these chemicals. We know there's some genotype or some variability by genotype. So their original goal was to make a really hot variety, something that would really serve for weed control after that crop was terminated, which is still a valid goal for some purposes. I'm a former vegetable grower, and for me, I would like something that I can grow and terminate and not be nervous about planting my lettuce or salad crop into. So there's a purpose for both, and this is the field assay for allelopathy. So this is a highly allelopathic accession. They call this the halo of death, which is very dramatic. And you don't see that around these. These are less allelopathic plants, and they're not inhibiting the lettuce growth at all. So they have 3 advanced lines that have been selected for high allelopathy. They'll start nationwide testing this fall. They've also taken those hot lines and crossed them by Aroostook and Indy Gardner, which are 2 rye lines that are well adapted to cold conditions. So this is the hot by northern lines. We have these planted in a couple of places at Cornell, also in Minnesota. We'll select for the agronomic characteristics we like, send them to North Carolina for allelopathy testing, and then we can make a divergent population. So we can make a high allelopathy nursery next year and a low allelopathy nursery and see if we can make that trait diverge in germplasm that's otherwise also good for the system. So high biomass in the spring, etc. Early flowering. And finally, in rye, we are looking at cold soil germination and vigor, knowing that, the reason people love rye is that you can sow it late. Can we push it later? So we're doing this we're taking those hot by northern populations, planting them here. This is a thermal gradient table with a cooling pump at each end. So we have very cold temperatures at the ends. We have frozen soil at the ends, moving up toward about 3 degrees Celsius in the middle, and then planting these different lines. Each little marker there is a different line, and finding the individual plants that are surviving cold temperatures best. Then they go in a cooler to vernalize, and then we make seed on them and see if we can generate a very cold tolerant population. Doing the same experiment up in Chazy in northern New York to see if we can get make selections on their actual cold winter. To see if we can move the needle on cold tolerance at all. And finally, this is the newest crop to the program. We're working with Mike Stam, who's a canola breeder out of Kansas State, and we're starting just by trialing things he's already got in his program. So just do things that he has already served cover cropping purposes well, in terms of good winter survival, high biomass accumulation in the spring. And if so, great. We just need to promote those varieties for those purposes. And if we're not seeing exactly what we want, we can start breeding for those things. So in summary, our progress, coupled with hairy vetch varieties, this genetic marker for hard seed in hairy vetch, winter pea variety, a variety release coming, and also germplasm releases that will be publicly available. And then the rye breeding for allelopathy and cold soil emergence and vigor. And then I chose the word pitfalls because it sounded nice with progress and potentials, but we can reframe them as challenges. Trait variation is not infinite, right? We may never make crimson clover be a northern crop, which is okay. That's why we have lots of species to select from. We know that some traits have significant environmental components to how they're going to show up. So we know that what we're doing is a piece of making cover crops successful, but dialing in the cropping systems for each person's soils and equipment and crop rotation and all those things are equally as important. Cover crop mixtures, breeding specifically for them is a big new thing we're thinking about. And finally, we know that if we're going to get cover crops on millions more acres, we're gonna need a lot more seed. And that means we'll need new seed producers and probably new seed producing regions, or at least expansion in regions where there are only a couple growers doing it right now. To that end, we're doing some focus groups for people who are producing cover crop seed now this winter. Our idea is to try to understand best practices. Like, what are people doing? What have people tried and have decided doesn't work? So we can then design our seed yield trials around questions people still have, or at least using the best knowledge that's out there. So if you or people you know are already producing vetch seed, winter pea seed, rye seed, I know a lot of people grow rye, or clover seed, probably not up here. Let me know either at that CCPN email, or you can contact me through our website, Cover Crop Breeding Network. We'd love to get you hooked up with those focus groups so we can hopefully learn as much as we can from growers from different regions. So thank you so much for having me. Thanks to our huge team whose work I get to represent. Questions are welcome.
Right, well, thank you very much.
Great.
Yeah, just watching that allelopathy rye that you're showing that a lot of allelopathy,
Mhm.
but then like a dry bean or soybean rotation, is that what you use it for that situation? Or,
Yes, the original thought,
Could you repeat this question?
yes. So the question is, what crop rotation would that high allelopathy rye fit into? If the allelopathy only affected small seeds, then yes, a soybean or a dry bean rotation where you have a large seeded cash crop seed would be perfect. We've done some greenhouse, the North Carolina folks have done some greenhouse studies that are just finishing up. We're just seeing preliminary results. And are seeing some inhibition on even the large seeded crops, even on the corn and the soybeans, which is not ideal, obviously, for those cropping systems. So there really may be a limit to the amount of allelopathy that is productive. Unless I'm trying to think of when would it be favorable to just suppress all plant growth. Maybe
You could, if you were planting a winter wheat, for instance, and you were just leaving it fallow after a rye cover crop.
Right.
You could even potentially no-till that wheat after.
Thank you. That's good thinking. Thank you. And you all know the cropping systems much better. I didn't say this, but I came to this from a vegetable production and then vegetable breeding background. So like these cropping systems are something I'm learning like right now. So you all have the expertise in that for sure. But the answer for allelopathy is like, it would be awesome if this only affected small seeds and you could plant a really hot rye crop and then plant soybeans or corn right into it and have no effect on the cash crop, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Yeah.
Other questions? In the back? Oh, sorry, hold on a second. Gotta get my exercise in somewhere.
Right.
With changes in like precipitation amount and temperature, are you also looking at those characteristics of those seeds and then?
That one, up on top.
I did, sorry. Just
I can repeat it, yeah. So you're asking, are we testing for germination and growth in dry conditions versus? So we haven't done lab testing for those conditions yet, although I think our rye breeder is looking into that, like doing some testing explicitly for, low moisture germination. The way we kind of get to that is that we have this diverse network of testing sites, which get a lot of different weather and some will be cold, or some will be dry, some have too much moisture. And so by seeing what does well in a whole lot of site years, we're getting some of that, but we aren't like systematically selecting for low moisture emergence or anything right now, but it's something we could do.
Hold on. Now I got this figured out. I want to ask you a question.
So regarding winter hardiness,
Mhm.
how are you taking into account snow cover, freeze and thaw cycles and all those other things
Yeah,
that impact survivability?
yes. Well, so our analysis, the kind of analysis I showed you just for winter survival, doesn't necessarily correct for, what conditions led to that winter survival or what conditions aided it. But then we take a next step and look at weather data from each region, or each, as close as we can get, to the site where the crop was grown. And look at, snow cover is a big one. So depth of snow cover and also patterns of present absence, because we know that freeze thaw and being exposed and then being covered, et cetera, can be stressful to the plant. And we can start to learn what are the drivers of winter survival. So, so certainly the snow cover helps. And I don't know off the top of my head, like if there's a minimum temperature that is associated, but that's how we get at it. We don't correct the raw, percent of survival per se, but we learn what's surviving well, and then we learn what's driving winter survival in the crop. Yeah.